The old man stood at the edge of the train platform in Emery Junction, where wild grass poked through cracks and pigeons circled like memories. He wore a navy blue overcoat, one sleeve pinned up where his left arm used to be. The morning was overcast, the kind of gray that made everything feel unfinished. Few people noticed him. The conductor glanced his way and said nothing. A mother with 2 toddlers moved a bit farther down the platform. A teenage girl with headphones gave him a quick, curious look, then turned away. He didn't move, didn't shift his weight, just stared down the tracks like they owed him something. The freight train arrived late. When it passed, he didn't flinch. A gust from the cars blew open his coat slightly, revealing a faded service patch on the inside lining, U.S. Army, 2nd Infantry Division. He exhaled slowly. That was the first sound he'd made all morning. At 7:42 a.m., he sat down on the bench beside a garbage can, setting his single canvas bag at his feet. No ticket. No phone. No expression. A newspaper clipping peeked out of his pocket, folded, worn, the headline nearly rubbed away, Veterans Home to be demolished by June 1st. The station manager came over eventually and asked, "Need help, sir?" He shook his head. "Just waiting." "For someone?" "No," he said, voice low but certain. "For the past to catch up." The man tipped his cap and walked off, uneased. And still, the old man waited, beside the rusting tracks, as the morning trains passed, and the town hurried by without knowing why he was there at all. His name was Elias Monroe. Born in 1938 in a narrow, weather-beaten house near the iron mills of Youngstown, Ohio. His father was a furnace man, stubborn, short-tempered, and silent. His mother worked the night shift at a textile plant, fingers raw from thread and bleach. Elias grew up between shifts and silence, taught early that pain was private, and that survival had no room for sentiment. He had one brother, Cal, younger by 3 years, who loved baseball and had a laugh that could break through walls. They shared a room until the day Cal left for Vietnam in 1967. Cal never made it back. His unit vanished during a reconnaissance mission northeast of Da Nang. No body, no explanation, just a telegram, a vague report, and a line that read, "Presumed Kia." Elias read the line 3 times, then went outside and punched the siding of the house until his knuckles bled. He enlisted that same week. He was 29, older than most of the others. Tall, sinewy, with dark eyes that gave nothing away. The army put him in with the 2nd Infantry, Bravo Company. He trained quickly and learned quicker. The jungle didn't frighten him. The noise didn't break him. His commanding officer wrote that, "Monroe has a stillness about him, like he's already survived something worse." In February 1969, outside Quang Tin Province, Bravo Company was ambushed during a night patrol. The enemy had been waiting in the hills, trip wires, snipers, the works. Within minutes, confusion reigned. Radios failed. One of the medics went down. Elias found him bleeding beneath a collapsed tree, lungs filling with fluid. With one arm already broken and the other pressed against a wound in his side, Elias dragged the man across 70 yards of open fire to safety. Then he went back, twice more. He didn't say a word the whole time. When the dust cleared, 7 men were dead. 4 more had been saved because of him. He refused commendation. Wouldn't even speak to the press when the army tried to run a piece on his actions. After his discharge in 1970, Elias returned to Youngstown for exactly 9 days. The house was smaller than he remembered. The siding still bore the faint outline of his bloodied knuckles from the day Cal was declared missing. His parents were gone, his mother had died of cancer while he was overseas, and his father had drunk himself into a final heart attack. There was nothing left. He packed a single bag and left town without telling anyone. For decades, Elias drifted, not aimlessly, but deliberately, as if searching for something that refused to be found. He worked odd jobs, a security guard in Kansas City, a custodian at a school in Tacoma, a groundskeeper in St. Louis. He never stayed more than a few years. Never left a forwarding address. But always, without fail, every November, he visited the nearest war memorial, sometimes at dawn, sometimes just before closing, and stood silently in front of the name wall. He carried a photograph folded into quarters, a snapshot of Cal in uniform, sitting on the hood of a Jeep, grinning. It was faded nearly to nothing. In 1991, he settled, briefly, in Emory Junction, Pennsylvania. The town had a quiet rhythm, and more importantly, it had a veterans' home just off State Route 43. The building was plain, sun-bleached, and a little sagging at the eaves, but it was clean and the staff minded their own business. Elias didn't need much. A cot, a locker, access to the woods behind the property where he could walk alone. For the first time in years, he let his guard down. A little. He began tending the flower beds out front. Not officially, not by request. He just started doing it. When the building manager asked him why, Elias shrugged. "The place looks like someone left it behind," he said. "Figured I'd help it look like someone came back." Over time, people noticed. New residents, many of them half Elias's age, sought him out. Not for conversation, he didn't give much of that, but for presence. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested gravity. That if he sat beside you long enough, your thoughts might untangle a little. He never talked about Vietnam. Not even when pressed. But once, a nurse named Lenora asked if he ever missed it, the war, the camaraderie, the purpose. He stared out the window for a while, then said, "I don't miss it. But I never really left it, either." In 2019, a new state administrator announced a proposal to shut down the veterans' home, citing budget constraints and inefficient occupancy. Protests followed, but funding dried up. By April of 2020, most residents had been transferred or discharged. Elias was among the last 7 remaining. On May 17, a moving van arrived. The driver found Elias sitting on the bench beneath the flagpole, bag packed, hat pulled low. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked. Elias looked toward the distant hills. "Don't know yet. But I reckon the past just turned into the future." He didn't say goodbye. He just walked to the truck, got in, and didn't look back. That's how he ended up at the train station in Emory Junction, with no clear destination, just the clipping in his pocket, the memory of a brother whose name never made it onto the wall, and a lifetime of steps that never quite led home. Elias rented a room above Keegan's Hardware, 2 blocks from the rail yard. The stairs were crooked and the radiator coughed all winter, but the window faced west, and the sunsets reminded him of hills he couldn't name anymore. He paid in cash. Keegan didn't ask questions. That suited them both. Most days, Elias walked to the diner on 6th and Maple. Quiet corner booth. Same order. Black coffee, dry toast, soft eggs. The waitstaff got used to his silence. Young folks called him Colonel out of habit, even though he never made it past sergeant. He never corrected them. It didn't matter. The country had changed. He saw it in the eyes of passing strangers, tired, suspicious, always somewhere else. Men on their phones arguing with people they weren't standing in front of. Women in uniforms rushing to second jobs. Children looking at screens instead of clouds. He didn't begrudge them. But sometimes he'd sit on the bench outside the train station and wonder if all the sacrifice had simply bought more noise. One day, he overheard a teenager mock an old veteran standing at a bus stop, medals pinned proudly to his coat. The boy laughed, said something about dinosaurs and wars that didn't matter. The old man said nothing, only clutched his cane tighter. Elias stood. Walked over. Looked the boy in the eye. "History doesn't ask for your permission," he said quietly. "But it might ask for your help someday." The boy flushed and walked off. The old veteran nodded in thanks. It wasn't much. But moments like that stayed in Elias's chest long after they ended. The real trouble started in late spring. The town council of Emery Junction announced plans for revitalization. Old buildings were to be torn down. Parks repurposed. Even the war memorial was scheduled to be moved to a new location with better parking. Elias attended a town meeting for the first time in his life. He sat near the back, still and quiet. The speaker, a developer from out of town, pointed at a slide on a screen. The Veterans Monument will be relocated to a more modern community hub. Interactive kiosks, digital archives, and improved accessibility. Elias stood. Slowly. You mean you're moving the only thing in this town that doesn't ask for applause, he said. Murmurs filled the room. Someone shouted, let the man speak. He didn't say much more. Just enough to silence the developer and remind people that honoring the past wasn't about efficiency. It was about memory. Afterward, people approached him. Strangers. Shopkeepers. Teachers. One woman, tearful, said her father's name was on the back of the stone. Please don't let them move it, she said. He promised nothing. But inside, something had shifted. Elias began writing letters. First to the local paper. Then to the regional news station. Then to veterans groups. No flourish. Just facts. Photos of the memorial. Excerpts from dedication speeches. Names of men long gone. Some letters were ignored. Others got published. One was picked up by a local talk show, whose host read it on air, ending with the line, "The war ended, but for some men, service never did." Still, the town moved forward with its plans. A demolition date was set, September 5th. Elias started sitting by the memorial every day. People noticed. He'd sit from dawn until noon, then return before dusk. Just reading, watching, waiting. Others joined him. At first just one or two. Then a dozen. Veterans. Widows. Students. A mother with a stroller who said her grandfather had served in Korea. They brought folding chairs. Flags. Candles. By the end of August, the relocation was delayed. Officials claimed it was due to community feedback and pending review. But Elias knew. He'd seen it before, in the field, in the fight, in the quiet acts that changed the course of lives, the power of simply showing up. Still, the town grew louder. Construction trucks rumbled down Main. A billboard advertising luxury condos replaced the old pharmacy. Rumors spread that Keegan's hardware had been sold. Then, just after Labor Day, Elias received an envelope under his door. No return address. Inside, a typed letter from a law firm representing the developers. Loitering near the war memorial constitutes a violation of town ordinances and may result in legal action. He read it twice. Then folded it neatly, placed it on the nightstand, and stared out the window for a long time. The next morning, he walked to the memorial and stood facing it, arms behind his back. He didn't bring a chair. He didn't sit. At noon, police arrived. 2 officers. One young. One older. The younger one looked nervous. "Sir, we've had complaints. You've been asked not to." Elias turned. Slowly. "Do what?" he asked. The older officer stepped forward. "Eli Monroe, right?" Elias nodded. The officer looked at the monument, then at the man. "My uncle served with the 2nd Infantry. Said there was a guy once dragged a wounded man across a rice paddy with one arm." Elias said nothing. The officer exhaled. "We'll file the report. But I think we'll take our lunch break here today." They sat beside him. By sundown, 15 others joined. No signs. No speeches. Just presence. And the silence, the kind that says, not this time. Not without a fight. Word spread, quietly at first. No hashtags, no news trucks, just murmurs in grocery aisles, second looks at the memorial, a few photos passed between neighbors. They called it the sitting. Every evening now, a few more folding chairs appeared, a few more bodies settled under the elm trees that flanked the monument like aging sentinels. They brought nothing flashy, no posters or chants, just themselves, and the unspoken agreement that they would not move. Elias remained at the center. He never declared himself a leader, never told anyone to join, never organized or instructed. But he was always there, before dawn, coffee in a dented thermos, coat pulled tight, eyes steady. Lenora drove in from 2 towns over after seeing his name mentioned in a letter to the editor. She hadn't seen Elias in years, not since the veterans' home shut down. When she approached, he looked up and gave a faint nod, as if she had simply returned from the store. No hug, no fuss. But he made space on the bench. "You didn't call," she said. "I didn't think I had time," he replied. She sat beside him in silence, hand resting near his, and said, "Then I'll make time for you." That night, it rained. Hard. The kind of September storm that tore leaves from the trees like paper. Most people assumed the sitters would clear out. They didn't. Elias sat still under his poncho, hat dripping, steam rising from the ground like breath. The others followed. Someone passed out raincoats. Another brought a blue tarp. A teenage girl carried out a tray of soup and bread from the diner and left it on the bench without a word. By the next morning, the memorial was drier than Main Street. The city responded with warnings. An official from the Department of Urban Development issued a statement: "While we respect the contributions of our veterans, unauthorized gatherings may pose safety risks and interfere with public works." The paper ran it under the headline, "Veterans Stand Firm Amid Relocation Debate." A reporter named Lyle Whitman requested an interview. Elias declined. "It's not about my voice," he said. "It's about all the ones that stopped speaking." Still, the story gained traction. State outlets picked it up. Then regional ones. Photos circulated, a lone veteran under the elm trees, others gathered in a half-circle, heads bowed not in grief but in resolve. A local artist painted a mural on a nearby wall, stylized silhouettes beneath a tree, the war memorial standing firm while buildings around it leaned and crumbled. It was titled "The Root That Wouldn't Budge." The next week, the town council postponed demolition indefinitely. But that didn't stop the pressure. Private security appeared, men in dark jackets with clipboards and earpieces. They took photos. Logged comings and goings. Elias ignored them. Developers threatened lawsuits. Eminent domain was floated. That's when the letters started. Not threats, testimonies. Handwritten notes, emails, old photos mailed in from strangers, a man from Colorado who served with Elias's company in '69, now in a wheelchair. A schoolteacher in Indiana whose father's name was carved into the back wall of the monument. A boy from Tennessee who said the photo of Elias in the rain had reminded him to ask his grandfather about the war, for the first time. They stacked up quickly. Lenora sorted them into piles and tied them with string. "People are watching," she said. "Doesn't mean they'll act," Elias answered. "Sometimes watching is the first act," she replied. Elias said nothing, but the next morning, he brought a second thermos. On September 21st, something changed. A woman named Amina Ahmed arrived from D.C., an attorney who specialized in historical preservation. She had a portfolio of credentials, but more importantly, she had grit. She sat beside Elias and introduced herself without preamble. "I read about you. I don't work for the government, or a campaign. I just don't like bulldozers winning arguments. Elias blinked slowly. You always this direct? Only with men worth listening to. She filed an injunction the next day. Claimed the monument site met the qualifications for emergency heritage designation under state law. The court set a hearing for October 5th. Until then, no one could move a stone, dig a trench, or touch a leaf on the surrounding elm trees. The news lit a spark. Veterans groups rallied. Local businesses hung photos of the memorial in their windows. The diner offered free coffee to anyone who sat a full hour with the vigil. Even the town council began to fracture. One council member, a retired Navy officer, publicly stated, "If we can't protect memory, we shouldn't be trusted with progress." But not everyone was moved. Someone threw a rock through the mural window. Spray-painted relics don't pay rent across the bench where Elias usually sat. The next morning, Elias arrived earlier than usual. He wiped off the bench himself. Sat down. Unwrapped a sandwich. Ate slowly. More people joined that day than ever before. They didn't speak of anger. They didn't discuss politics. They simply remembered. Remembered brothers, fathers, neighbors. The ones who came back changed. The ones who didn't come back at all. And in that remembering, they bore witness, not just to the past, but to the strength it still carried. Even in silence. Even beneath elm trees and overcast skies. Even when progress pounded the earth like war drums and said, "Move." They stayed. The courtroom was plain, no high ceilings or echoing halls, just aging tile and a wall clock that ticked too loud. October 5th came gray and cold, as if the sky itself held its breath. Elias hadn't worn his uniform in decades. But that morning, Lenora helped him button the old jacket, slow and careful. The fabric was tighter now, worn smooth at the elbows. The sergeant stripes had faded, and the color patch had lost its brightness. But it still fit. He didn't say much on the drive. Just looked out the window and clutched a folded letter in his lap, the one Cal had sent just before he vanished. When they arrived at the courthouse, the steps were lined. Quietly, respectfully, men and women stood at attention. No chants, no signs. Just veterans in mismatched uniforms, young and old, caps pressed to chests, hands by their sides. Amina walked beside Elias, carrying the file thick with affidavits, testimonies, and photos. She nodded to each face they passed, her heels echoing like punctuation. Inside, the courtroom filled fast. Journalists lined the back wall. A young law clerk handed the judge a folder, but her eyes kept drifting to Elias. The judge, a woman in her early 60s, glanced up briefly before scanning the room. "Let's proceed," she said. The developer's lawyer spoke first. Polished, efficient. He argued commerce, modernization, accessibility. "The memorial is not being destroyed," he said. "Merely relocated to a better, more visible space with digital archives and modern amenities." Amina rose. Calm. Steady. "This is not about stone," she said. "It's about soil. About context. About honoring history in the place where memory was planted." Then she turned to Elias. "Mr. Monroe, would you care to speak?" He stood slowly. The room went still. Even the court recorder looked up. He didn't use the microphone. He didn't need to. "I won't recite dates," Elias said. "I won't list battles or medals. I'm not a historian. I'm what's left." He paused. Looked at the judge. "That memorial's not just names. It's breath. It's people who wore boots through jungle rot and desert sand. People who missed weddings, funerals, the births of their children. Some didn't come home. Some came back with pieces missing, some you could see, some you couldn't. We don't need an interactive kiosk. We need ground that remembers. He looked down, then back up. My brother's name was never carved into any stone. He disappeared. But when I sit by that monument, I feel like maybe he still counts. The judge didn't ask any questions. She didn't have to. That afternoon, she issued a ruling: the memorial would remain. The area surrounding it was to be designated a permanent historic site under emergency state protection. A small cheer broke out in the hallway. One veteran saluted Elias as he passed. Another placed a single red rose on the courthouse steps. Outside, the elm trees bowed slightly in the autumn wind. That evening, a candlelight gathering formed at the memorial. No one had organized it, but by sundown, hundreds stood in a wide circle around Elias's bench. Children held small flags. Parents held photos. A harmonica played taps, soft and off-key. Then something unexpected happened. The mayor, who had remained publicly silent throughout the ordeal, arrived. He stepped through the crowd without ceremony, walked straight to Elias, and stood there awkwardly. "I was wrong," the mayor said. "Not just about the memorial. About what this place means. About you." Elias didn't reply. He just looked the man in the eye and gave a single nod. The mayor cleared his throat. "We'd like to make a formal dedication. If you'll permit it." Elias raised an eyebrow. 2 weeks later, a new plaque was added beneath the existing names. It read, "To those who carried the burden after the battles. Whose service continued in silence. Whose stories remind us what memory costs, and what it gives back." But there was one more surprise. On Veterans Day, the mayor held a public ceremony. Schools were dismissed early. The diner closed for the first time in 30 years. At 11 a.m., a Marine color guard marched down Main Street, followed by veterans from 5 wars. They stopped in front of the memorial. The mayor stepped up to the podium. "Today," he said, "we recognize not just sacrifice, but the refusal to let it be forgotten." One man reminded us how memory holds a town together. We honor that memory now. He gestured to a cloth-covered marker to the right of the monument. A young girl pulled the cloth away. Beneath it was a bronze bust, Elias Monroe, eyes forward, jaw firm. On the base. He sat. We stood. He remembered. We learned. Elias hadn't known they were making it. He stared at it, unmoving. Someone asked if he'd like to speak. He shook his head. Lenora whispered, "Say something." He took a step forward. Looked at the crowd. Then at the bust. "All I did was stay put," he said. "But sometimes, staying is the fight." The crowd was quiet. Then applause, not thunderous, but warm, like the sound of a town breathing together. That night, Elias returned to his room above Keegan's hardware. He placed a small American flag in the flower pot on the sill. Sat down in the chair by the window. Watched the sun sink behind the train yard like it had somewhere to be. And for the first time in decades, he slept without the sound of boots in his dreams. Winter came early that year. By the first week of November, Emory Junction lay beneath a thin sheet of snow, softening the sharp edges of sidewalks and railings. The elm trees around the war memorial stood bare, their limbs like bone against the slate-colored sky. Most people stayed indoors now, but every morning, Elias made his slow walk down Main Street. Coat buttoned high. Cap pulled low. A cane now steadied his right hand, though he rarely leaned on it. The bench at the monument had been reinforced, new planks, polished brass ends. A plaque on the back read, "Reserved, for those who sat when others forgot." Elias sat there each morning like it was a job. He stayed for an hour. Sometimes more. Children waved as they passed. Veterans tipped their hats. A man from the fire department brought him hot coffee in a thermos twice a week, no words exchanged. He'd simply set it down, nod, and walk away. Lenora visited often. She'd taken a position as the local VA coordinator, unofficially promoted by the mayor himself after the events of the hearing. She brought folders, lists of names, ideas for outreach. But every time she tried to talk about legacy, Elias would wave her off. "I'm not building anything," he'd say. "Just watching something grow." But he wasn't unaware. He saw the changes. The monument grounds were now maintained by volunteers, rotating groups of high school students, veterans, and retirees. The local middle school began holding their civics classes on the lawn every other Friday. A brass bell had been installed on a nearby post, rung each time someone added a name to the town's honor roll. One morning, Elias arrived to find a group of teenagers seated on the grass, huddled around a man in his 30s reading aloud from a leather notebook. The kids looked up when Elias passed, one of them whispering, "That's him." The man stood, introduced himself as Thomas Gerhardt, a teacher from a neighboring county. "I brought my class," he said. Wanted them to see what standing still can do. Elias gave the faintest of smiles. "It doesn't look like standing when you've carried enough." That night, back in his small upstairs room, Elias stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. The face that looked back was unfamiliar, creased, lean, eyes rimmed in red from a lifetime of wind and dust. But behind all that was something else. Not peace, exactly. But place. He opened the drawer of his nightstand, pulled out Cal's last letter, and unfolded it with practiced care. The creases were worn nearly through. "Don't wait for everything to make sense, Eli. Some things just have to be carried." He read it once more, then placed it gently beneath a copy of the day's paper. The headline, "Monroe Award to Recognize Quiet Acts of Courage." He hadn't known about that either. Apparently, a coalition of educators and veterans had created an annual award in his name. No cash prize. No stage. Just a letter and a small pin sent each year to someone who'd acted in defense of dignity, memory, or truth without expectation of recognition. The first recipient was a school janitor in New Hampshire who spent his nights researching names from local war archives so no fallen soldier went unmarked. Elias said nothing when he heard. Just nodded and resumed sipping his tea. But in private, he began writing again. Not letters to newspapers. Letters to people. He wrote one to Thomas Gerhardt, thanking him for bringing his students. One to the mayor, simply saying, "Don't lose your nerve." And one to Lenora. 3 pages long. He folded it, sealed it, but didn't give it to her right away. By late November, Elias's steps grew slower. He no longer walked the full length of Maine. Sometimes, Lenora or one of the volunteers would meet him halfway and guide him the rest of the way to the bench. He never complained. But the stillness that had once felt like strength now held an edge of fragility. On December 2nd, Elias didn't come. Lenora checked his room. Found the door unlocked, the heater humming, his coat folded on the bed. Elias was gone. Not in a dramatic way. Not in fear or despair. He had passed in his sleep, hand resting on his chest, Cal's letter beneath his fingers. A single lamp glowed on the nightstand. The cup of tea beside it was still warm. The town knew before noon. Flags lowered. Bells rang. The diner closed early. Within 24 hours, a crowd had gathered at the memorial. By the third day, it had tripled. They held the service on the lawn, in the same spot where Elias had first sat beneath the elm trees. There was no hearse, his body had been donated to the VA medical program per his request. But his cane, jacket, and cap rested on the bench. Speakers came from all over. Veterans from units Elias never served in, students from schools he'd never entered, strangers who had once passed him on the sidewalk and remembered how he made them feel seen. Lenora read his final letter aloud. If silence is all we leave behind, then let it be full of meaning. Let people say we stayed. That we didn't give in to forgetfulness. That we told the truth, even if only by sitting still long enough to remember. That night, candles lit the memorial again. Not out of protest. Out of tribute. The bust remained, cleaned and polished. The plaque beneath it bore new words, carved the morning after he died. Memory lives where men like Elias wait. But something else happened, too. Letters began arriving again. This time addressed to Elias Monroe. From strangers. From children. From veterans who never met him. They wrote about people they missed. About burdens they carried. About how a man who sat still taught them how to move forward. Lenora collected each letter. She kept them in a wooden box Elias had once used to hold his tools. She called it the Stillness Archive. It would travel to schools, libraries, and veteran centers. Inside it, a folded jacket. A worn cane. A photo of Elias under the elm tree. And a sign that read, "Sit. Read. Remember. Then go do something quiet that matters." He stayed.